morning. Today is Tuesday, January 7, 2020. Sorry about that. A mistake I usually make through mid-February each year. So January 7, 2020, regular meeting of the Lane County Board of Commissioners. I'd like to welcome everyone here today for our meeting. And under our adjustments to the agenda, just want to note for the board and the public's benefit that our meeting tomorrow begins at 8:15 rather than 9 a.m. And that is to accommodate the morning meeting on the budget and where we are on the budget, both mid-year on the budget, but also kicking off the budget that will commence July 1 of this year. So big budget planning meeting tomorrow morning. It'll be right here in Harris Hall. We're going to arrange the tables down in front for the commissioners and department directors. The public's welcome to attend and be basically sitting where you're sitting. Might need a little bit of the space there, but we won't be all up here and the department directors down there. We'll all be down there. So please try to come here at around 8, and we'll start at 8:15. Another adjustment is that we'll have on our consent calendar item 6A5. This is the matter of the letter to the U.S. Department of State regarding consent to initial refugee resettlement in Lane County. And Jeff Kincaid and our administrator, Steve Mokrahysky, will be available for a separate discussion. Commissioner Bozevich asked that be pulled off the consent calendar. So we'll be doing that. And other than that, are we ready to move on to our next item? I'm turning to the board as well as if there are any other adjustments to the agenda. And Mr. Mokrahysky. Okay, nope. All right, we're very good. Well, at this time, I'm going to call on our vice chair because today is my last day as board chair.
Presumably, we've not decided yet.
Oh. Okay. It's a presentation to the current board chair.
Well, as is tradition, I have the pleasure of giving you the gavel of honor for being our chair this year. It says presented to Pete Sorensen in gratitude for his service as board chair for Lane County Commissioners for 2019. We've done a lot of work this year, and it does take leadership to get that done. You went through a lot of it yesterday during the State of the County address, but I wanted to pick out just a few that I know, you've been working on, the whole board's been working on for a long time, and they really got underway. The MLK Commons groundbreaking was a big deal, and I appreciate your leadership throughout the year to steward that through. We also made big strides on some new locations for parole and probation and a clinic on West 11th. All those things take time and take extra time of our chair. So I want to thank you for doing so, along with all the other great work we got done last year.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Well, as I mentioned yesterday in the State of the County address, none of what we do here at Lane County comes down to one person usually. Sometimes it does, but normally it's a compilation of what lots of people, both up here and in the staff and in the community do. So I just appreciate this gavel, ceremonial gavel. I really appreciate it, and I've enjoyed being chair. I enjoy being not chair more, but I do enjoy being chair once in a while. So thank you, and I'm glad that I got a chance to serve in my 23rd year as board chair. And now, as my final act as board chair, I'd like to go on to item 2A, which is the annual requirement under our Lane County Charter to elect a board chair for the year that begins today, the first Tuesday of the calendar year. And are there any nominations for board chair? Commissioner Joe Burney.
Even though Commissioner Buck had a lot to learn as vice chair, and she did okay, I would like to nominate her to rotate in and become chair of the Lane County Board of Commissioners for 2020.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved by Commissioner Burney and seconded by Commissioner Bozovich to elect Heather Buck as chair of the Board of Commissioners for 2020. Other nominations?
To the
Other discussions?
The motion.
Yep.
Thank you. This is my start of my 8th year as a county commissioner. I served previously on 3 other boards, elected boards. And on the 4 elected bodies that I've served on 3 of them have a process that is adhered to, more than loosely, fairly tightly adhered to, as to how the new president or chair or speaker in one case is selected. We don't have such a process. So in the House of Representatives, the first vote, I served in the House, and the first vote determines the head elected official, who's called the Speaker of the House. The speakers always voted on party lines. On the recent 30-30 split, where parties were evenly split, there were no non-affiliated or third-party candidates. This elected co-speakers. That happened, and it worked very well. Subsequent to the selection of the speaker has sole discretion as to who he or she selects to chair the various leadership positions, the various leadership committees. The only exception to that is the Speaker Pro Tem, which is also elected by the general body. In the Eugene City Council, the councilor who's least recently served as president is typically elected to be vice president and subsequently elected president. Councilors typically have to serve a full year before being elected to be the vice president of the Eugene City Council. The Bethel School Board, which I served on, has a similar process to the Eugene City Council. In the Lane County Board of Commissioners, we don't have such a process. And because we don't make decisions outside of board meetings, either in person or serially, we don't make these decisions, I'm told. We wait until this meeting to determine who the chair is going to be, and to determine who the vice chair is going to be subsequent to that. Once again, that decision is made today. It wasn't made this morning, last week, or 1 year ago today. It was made today. It will be made today. Now, on the Board of County Commissioners, often the vice chair becomes the chair. That's not always the case. Commissioner Sorensen wasn't vice chair before he became chair. When I was first chair, my second year, on the Board of Commissioners, I had not served as vice chair. I'd sat out leadership for a year before serving in a leadership position. So that being said, we don't have a process, and it seems a little mysterious sometimes to people that how do we come to the decision where Commissioner Sorensen turned to his left, not to his right, but to his left, and we both had our hands up, and I accepted the nomination from Commissioner Burney. How do we come to that decision? Well, it's mysterious to me. It's mysterious to anybody watching, I'm sure, because we have a relatively mysterious process. We don't decide until this meeting. So that being said, Section 14 of our Lane County Charter revised, at the first regular meeting each year, the Board of County Commissioners shall designate one of its members as chair of the board for the year. The chair shall preside over the meetings of the board, have a vote on all questions before it, and have authority to preserve order at board meetings, enforce the rules of the board, and determine the order of board business under the rules of the board. And as we noticed this last year, and compare it to previous years, there's a great deal of latitude and discretion that the board chair is able to utilize. At the time the chair is designated in paragraph 1 above, the board shall also designate a vice chair who shall have identical authority as the chair in calling and conducting meetings when the chair is absent from the county. So I read all this because we don't have a process, and I think we owe it to the public to have some form of a process rather than mysteriously waiting until Tuesday morning at 9:15 to wonder who's going to be nominated to be the next board chair. That being said, I'm going to support the current nomination. But it's important that the public understands that this is not a process that we go through. We don't talk about this before we get here. I don't think. I haven't talked about it before we got here. If other people have, they've done it without talking to me about it. So we're at a point right now where a board chair has been nominated and seconded, and as far as I'm concerned, we're ready for the vote.
Okay, other comments, questions, debates, et cetera? I'll just say that the decisions of the board to select a board chair is really important because really not only does the board chair run these meetings, and that's what people see, but it's the planning of the meetings, it's the work to get the agenda together, to work with our agenda team, and it's an important set of responsibilities to make sure everybody's included, make sure that people get a chance to give their views, and make sure the public is given an opportunity to speak when appropriate at our meetings. And one of the things that is good about the charter of Lane County that requires us to have both a chair and a vice chair is that if the chair isn't available, then we have somebody to be the chair. And by the way, our charter also says that if the vice chair is not available, then it's our senior member of the board by seniority on the board who is running the board meeting. So
Correction, Mr. Chair, it used to, it no longer says that. The section 14 doesn't include that language anymore.
Oh, okay, very good. Stand corrected. At any rate, we have a vice chair, and one of the other things that goes on behind the scenes that the public doesn't see is that the board chair and vice chair and county administrator and many other people are members of our agenda team that we formalized last year. And so the vice chair is intimately involved in planning all these meetings. And so that is a good process for a vice chair to move up to be chair if the board so chooses. And in this case, Commissioner Buck has done a fantastic job on the agenda team, and this is outside of public view. She participates in, I believe, every single meeting, over 50 meetings of the agenda team this year. And it's a big responsibility to get these meetings planned. And certainly for people that are new to the county government, not to just see the vice chair, well, she's just sitting there, and so what is she doing? Well, a lot of that work, vice chair work, is getting ready for these meetings and doing what needs to be done to make sure these meetings go smoothly and that things that the chair forgets to do, chair gets to be reminded of these things by the vice chair. So after we finish election of chair, we'll move on to vice chair. So any further comments on who's on the nomination for Heather Buck? Yes, Commissioner.
Just one final tiny correction. Commissioner Buck was not invited to the first couple of agenda setting meetings this year. It was subsequent to the first couple of meetings that Commissioner Buck, as vice chair, attended those meetings.
Yeah, thank you. And once we clarified our process to make sure we had our agenda team formalized, that was done, and thank you for your role in doing that. At any rate, now, no further comments. Any further comments? Very good. We'll go to a vote. All of those in favor of the motion to appoint Heather Buck as the new chair of the Lane County Board of Commissioners for 2019 signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. And it is my distinct privilege to welcome our new chair of the board. Congratulations. Move right on over here.
All right.
And we'll
the
change
switcheroo.
name tags. And we'll keep the chair up there, but since we're short one vice chair, we'll take that down.
For a moment.
It's the first time we sat beside each other in years.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate the honor of being chair. I did forget one thing when I was giving an honor to Mr. Sorensen for his work as chair last year, was a card, a gift, and we do have a $50 gift limit, but there's something a little nice in there for you and a card signed by all of us.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Pete. Good job.
Okay, so we'll move on to item 2C, election of a vice chair. And we got hands up everywhere. Commissioner Sorensen.
This time I'd like to nominate Joe Burney, Commissioner Joe Burney, to be vice chair of the board for 2020.
Second.
Okay, any other nominations? Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, I've stated the rules that other boards operate under in selection of the chair and vice chair. Selection of Commissioner Burney as a vice chair does in fact fit exactly, coincidentally, with the rules that the Bethel School Board and the Eugene City Council fit with. Commissioner Burney has been in office for a year and is in line to become, as the most distant from serving as chair, that it being never, to be in line to serve as a vice chair. So I will gladly and very pleased to support the nomination.
Any other nominations? Yes,
I don't have a nomination, but I do have a comment.
okay.
You know, last year when Commissioner Burney took office, I personally feel that decision for him to run and for him to be elected was a major impact on this Board of Commissioners. And the last year has been no disappointment to me that Joe has participated in virtually every meeting of the board. He has worked on his committees. He has asked lots of good questions in board meetings. And although this responsibility to be vice chair means he has to go to the agenda meetings and participate in them, and that's an extra, as I mentioned, extra 50 to 250 hours of work every year.
Wait a minute.
Wait a minute. It's a little bit more work than being a non-officer of the board. The board only has 5 members and 2 officers. But to me, it's a step up in leadership, and I really appreciate, Joe, your willingness to do this.
All right, any other comments? Okay, we'll go to a vote. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. It passes unanimously. Welcome, Mr. Vice Chair.
Welcome, Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you. My big apprehension is the timer.
The timer's luckily over there for the
Yeah,
moment.
but just for one meeting.
You have to wear your glasses.
So before we go into public comment, I just had a few words to say. We did a lot of wonderful work in 2019 and 2020. I kind of feel like we have several New Year's resolutions we will work to complete this year. We have the Climate Action Plan, our Housing Action Plan, and our Community Benefits Framework, amongst many other to-do items. But I look forward to working on those with our fellow board members this year, throughout the 2020 year. With that, we'll move to public comment. Are there any public comments today? Thank you. Okay. I'm going to do 2 at a time. The first one is Mr. Wittenberg. please feel free and come up to the table right here. We'll give you 3 minutes. That's your cue, Commissioner Sorensen.
Hard it is for me to talk just 3 minutes. That's the hardest thing in the whole world. I've been doing this for 50 years.
Well, you can state your name and the district that you're from, and then Mr. Lowry, you're up next.
I'm Jim Wittenberg. I'm a retired pharmacist, and I just turned 80 this year. And I have my adult and family services filed here in Eugene. So if they don't want to pay me food stamps, but I don't care, it's only $16, so they can have it. I figure if they need it that bad, they do. I'm just not going to fill out all these damn forms. Okay. Secondly, a very bad thing happened this last week, and as you probably, most of you know, Nick Fish died. He was a favorite person of mine. I've got half a dozen favorite politicians, and I lobbied his dad also in the Congress, and also I knew him very, very well. I almost ran against him. Unfortunately, I didn't, but he's one of the finest men I ever knew, and I'm going to miss him a lot. I'm going to miss him. Secondly, the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C., I planned to be in Montana with my brother and his family, but this came up. The Medicare Empowerment Act for negotiating drug costs. I happened to go to a pharmacy on the 6th of this month and got some heart medication. And these little white tablets ran, that I have in here, ran $10 a piece, twice a day. So that's $20 a day, and if my math is good, I would be out of money by about the middle of the month. Now, if I didn't eat and I robbed some banks, I could pay for that probably. But I had 13 medications, and this is more expensive than all my other medications put together, except the Eliquis, the blood thinner. And this, I've read some items here in Representative DeFazio's statement, and this Walden guy, I knew Greg well, and his dad also, he said that it's going to mess up the whole drug industry because we're not charging, we want to negotiate drug prices, the Medicare. And I remember when this happened, I said, oh, that's a mistake. It's going to come back and bite us, and now it is. We have the highest drug prices in the whole world. I beseech all of you to write letters to your congressman or to the Congress itself or to Nancy Pelosi, and if you're in favor of this, but $10 a tablet is just a little bit too much. I never thought I'd ever pay that much for a drug for myself, but this is worse. The last thing, I'm going to be going back to Washington to work on this. I feel that strongly about it. I just don't want to talk about it. I want to do something about it. Last thing is this same old property tax again. I'm giving up on that and going into Medicare because that's where I probably belong at 8 years old.
Thank you so much.
You betcha. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your comment. Mr. Lowry, you're up next, and after that, Mr. Piccioni. And before you start, if you don't mind, I know that there's a baby in the room. There's no reason if the baby's making noise that they need to exit. We know babies talk, and that's okay. That's what we do here. So make sure that you feel welcome here. Thank you, Mr.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Tim Lowry. I live in East Lane County near the community of Blue River. Up there, I work pretty extensively with the McKinsey Community Development Corporation, and currently we're working on a grant application for Business Oregon. Business Oregon indicates in the application forms is that letters of recommendation are not required, but if you do, submit only one. And we were wondering who the best board or organization might be to submit a letter on behalf of the work that the CDC has done. And you folks came right to the top of the list. So I would like to humbly ask the board if it would consider writing a letter in support of the work that the McKinsey Community Development Corporation has done. The mission of that organization is to foster and support economic, environmental, and community well-being in the McKinsey area. And they take it very seriously and have done good work. In the case of economic development, Marilyn Cross, who is the treasurer of the CDC, works very closely with Austin Ramirez, who is your staff person working on economic development. So basically, that's all I have to say, except congratulations to the new officers. Thank you to the old officers, which in one case is the same person. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Lowy. Mr. Piccioni, as just a reminder, when you do come up, make sure you state your full name and district you live
My
in.
name is David Ivan Piccioni. I live on Van Buren in Eugene between 6th and 7th. So I was going to talk about homelessness because Commissioner Farr said that that was something that we should probably address. I'm going to approach it from this point. I'm 51 years old. That's half a century. So I looked on the internet. What was the population when I was born? I was born in 1968. Population then was 3.5 billion, 3.5 billion. 50 years later, half a century later, we're close to 8 billion people. These people, they have to go, that's why we have people all over, because rent's gotten more expensive, there's less materials to build homes cheaply, and there's all kinds of restrictions. So, I don't think we're going to survive very long if we don't address this somehow. I think my suggestion would be with some kind of advertisement endeavor where we tell people, hey, 1 is good, 2 is good, but slow down. Anyway, so yeah, and I want to talk about the toilets that we don't have here. I don't know if you guys have any influence on that, but the big problem, as far as I see it, is that people throw clothes into the toilet. Those, I would like to see those toilets that are made of steel, like the ones in the jail, where they're not going to ever be moved, but I haven't figured out how to let the poop go through and stop a piece of clothing from being flushed, or syringes or stuff like that. So that's something that we can do together, figure that out. And I also read over there something about singing some patriotic song or something. I just want to say I don't really like nationalism because it puts us in a different perspective, in a different, we're in a different category than other countries. And I don't like that. I think that since we're all sexually compatible with all races of humans, that means that we are all pretty much equal. I mean, we do have differences, but similarities are much bigger. Thank you.
Thank you. We have 2 more, Christine Zeller-Powell, and next after her will be Emily Hurlburn. Hopefully I said that right. If you could state your name and your district, please.
My name is Christine Zeller-Powell, and I live in Commissioner Sorensen's district. I work with Refugee Resettlement Program at Catholic Community Services of Lane County, and CCS has been a refugee resettlement agency since 2016. And we work closely with the Refugee Resettlement Coalition of Lane County, which is made up of hundreds of concerned community members who volunteer and support refugee resettlement in our community. So since 2016, we have resettled 9 individuals, which includes 2 young children. It is a requirement of our contract that the individuals we resettle have ties to our community. These are usually family members who already live here. I speak on behalf of Catholic Community Services and the Refugee Resettlement Coalition when I say that it has been a privilege and a joy to be able to assist these families in reunification and to be able to live in peace and safety in our community. I would like to briefly describe the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program. All refugees admitted to the U.S. under the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program go through several years of vetting and screening and then come to the U.S. at the invitation of the federal government. These refugees are assigned to refugee resettlement agencies for at least 90 days of case management services and quickly become wage-earning and tax-paying contributors to our local economies and have a pathway to citizenship. Catholic Community Services of Lane County is the first and only refugee resettlement agency in Lane County and the only refugee resettlement agency in Oregon based outside of Portland. In October 2019, Executive Order 13888 created a new requirement that in order for refugee resettlement agencies to accept refugees for resettlement, the state and locality must affirmatively consent. So Governor Brown, Mayor Vinnis, and Mayor Lundberg have all given their consent, and we are now asking this board for consent on behalf of Lane County. We will likely receive few or no refugees in 2020 because the refugee admissions limits have been significantly lowered from, for example, 110,000 in fiscal year 2017 to only 18,000 this fiscal year. Still, we would like to make clear that this community welcomes refugees, and we would also like to be able to serve any refugees that are assigned to CCS for resettlement. So in closing, I would like to thank the commissioners for taking the time to consider giving consent for refugee resettlement in Lane County and allowing us to continue the work we've been doing for several years, which is helping families be together and start new lives in our community. And I look forward to any discussion that we have later, and we'll be available to participate if needed. Thank you.
Thank you. Emily Helburn, correct me if I said that wrong.
It's fine. I accept all sorts of pronunciations, and my handwriting isn't very clear. My name is Emily Heilbrunn. I'm in Commissioner Sorensen's district, and I'm also here to speak briefly about refugee resettlement. I'm a volunteer with the Refugee Resettlement Coalition of Lane County and am the facilitator of its steering committee. I've been involved since it started in 2016. As Christine Zeller-Powell mentioned, Catholic Community Services is the official refugee resettlement agency. The Refugee Resettlement Coalition is a community group of entirely volunteers that works with Catholic Community Services. And we're made up entirely, as I said, of volunteers. There's no financial cost to the county for refugee resettlement, and these families, with our support, become self-sufficient, tax-paying, contributing members of our community. And I'd like to echo what Christine said, that it's very rewarding to see them be able to unite with family members, get jobs, and become contributing members of the community that we're all part of. So I want to thank you for considering this important issue, and I will also be available if necessary for questions later. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't have anybody else on the sign-up list. Is there anybody who wanted to speak that didn't get a chance? Okay, I see none, so we'll move on to Commissioner's response and remonstrance. I will probably have a slight problem with remonstrances, the word remonstrance, so excuse me if I get that a little strange. Any commissioner comments, responses? Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I want to thank Mr. Piccioni for continuing to raise the issue of homelessness in our community. We need to make sure that we don't forget how urgent this problem is and how dire it is for people, particularly at this time of year. And so I just want to say that we are working on it. We are not working on it as hard as we should, in my judgment. We should be thinking about looking for some revenue for funding for homeless, and I think the business community is seeing the real impact of having people on their doorsteps that either are abusing the law of trespass, or they just have nowhere else to go. And the bottom line is many of these people have substance abuse problems and mental health problems, and I think that we need to do more to get them into appropriate treatment. As far as the work of the refugee advocates and helpers, you know, our community really appreciates all of the volunteer work and work to try to make it easier for people that are fleeing incredible violence and horrible situations. And our country's, at least historically, been a welcoming place for immigrants and for political and any refugee seeking that come into our country because of the threats that have been made against them. And some of the stories that I personally heard from these refugees are truly amazing as far as the amount of threat that they've encountered, and violence and death and destruction. And so to have volunteers come forward and do the work and make it possible for us to at least legally accept refugees, it's really great to see. Thanks for coming in. And my understanding is that either Jeff Kincaid from our staff or Mr. Mokrahysky, our county administrator, will be available to answer questions from the commissioners about the importance of getting this letter approved to the State Department. So thank you for coming in. And I'm really enjoying not being chair. Thank you so much.
Mr. Farr, or Commissioner Farr, excuse me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of things. And first, one thing is Mr. Wittenberg still here? It looks like he left. But regarding the cost of prescriptions, I read an article, I think it was today, regarding the cost of prescriptions from pharmacies, local pharmacies versus online costs. And the article stated that online costs are significantly lower, like maybe less than a third the cost of local pharmacies. I'm looking for the article. I can't find it, but Mr. Mokrahysky, I'm going to send a copy of that to you and to the other board members so you can see that it actually gave the website for online pharmaceuticals. Didn't have all pharmaceuticals, but had a broad range of the most commonly prescribed. Along those lines, I spent most of Sunday in urgent care or in emergency ophthalmology services for a neighbor of mine who has a house, has health insurance, and was going blind in one eye, unexplainably. And through the day, we went through a number of different health agencies. We went to urgent care and then to an emergency ophthalmologist, received 3 prescriptions, and at what was the insurance that my neighbor has covered everything pretty well, other than a tiny copay on everything. And that made me think, Mr. Petroni, about people who don't have such what we consider amenities as my neighbor, who was going blind and was able to access emergency services and receive fairly immediate treatment. So I checked with that neighbor yesterday evening, and the blindness, the symptoms of blindness were going away. You know, he was actually able to read and see because of the prescriptions. How many people in our community don't have that? How many people who live out there on the streets or live in substandard housing or don't have the kind of ready access to services that my neighbor had when they begin to, let's say, for instance, go blind? With seemingly no recourse. I think Ms. Mokrahysky, Commissioner Sorensen said that we're not moving fast enough on homelessness. We're moving fast. We've done a great many things in the last 7 years, but there are things that we can address very succinctly as a county and as a health department to help people access health care and to help people get the basic services that we and my neighbor essentially take for granted. So we're working on it. And Mr. Mokrahysky, I want to thank you for, we actually have 5 projects underway right now, 5 capital projects underway, like right now, including opioid addiction, including youth crisis center, including developmental disabilities, including parole and probation relocation. And And let's see, what was the fifth one? The MLK project, that little thing. That we're moving forward on projects that are already, the revenue stream has already been identified. But Commissioner Sorensen talked about the last thing that I want to talk about and that I will always wish to talk about is how do we afford housing? How do we in this community afford the housing, not just the people who are trying to access housing, but how do we afford building housing, providing housing? In 1997, I was on the Council Committee to Finance Affordable Housing. It's a committee, a large committee that met for a year long. Gene Tate was the chair. I was on that committee with Barbara Keller, with Sean Bowles, with Nancy Nathanson. It was a large committee. And we worked through a process of identifying a revenue stream to begin to help us to build affordable housing, to put money into affordable housing. The city at that time had an aggressive land bank philosophy, and the continue to provide parcels of land, but the building costs were beyond that. So we came up with a program, Commissioner Sorensen, back in 1997. It was a revenue recommendation that we had, and it was a 1% fee on utility services. It was only prescribed for EWEB customers because it was the city of Eugene that was putting this forward. And we put it on the ballot. We asked people, will you pay 1% of your utility fee to help us finance affordable housing? That 1% in 1997 would have given us $1 million per year at that point in those dollars. That's a lot of years ago, almost a quarter of a century ago. And it went to the ballot, and 70% of the people said, no, we don't want to give you that 1%. So whatever we do to find a revenue stream to finance affordable housing, and whatever we do to make certain that when we build housing, we minimize the cost of building housing, whether by allowing our codes to help us to build housing, or whether we allow land use to help us build housing, whatever it may be, finding ways to reduce the cost of housing. And if we do look for a different revenue stream, we have to make certain that people understand the value, the return on the investment for that 1% they would have gotten. Because if we'd put $1 million into housing back then, we wouldn't be wringing our hands anywhere near as much as we are today. And it would have cost, at the time, the estimate was for the average family of four in a 1,200 square foot house, about $1 a month. And everybody said no. So there's our revenue stream, Commissioner Sorensen. We have a lot of discussion that we can have this year, and really finding ways to put people into housing, whether it's making the housing less expensive or giving people more means to get into the housing. We have to do it. We have to do it at every turn. Thank you.
Any other comments? Yes, Commissioner McGurney.
Well, on behalf of myself, thank you, Commissioner Farr. I wish to God that had passed. And I, for one, will work with you and all commissioners to try and generate revenue streams that make sense to the residents of this county. If we keep going this rate, the homeless will outvote the homed, and we'll get those revenue streams. I would just like to say that the public input today actually was very consistent with something I wanted to read. This is very out of character for me. It relates to how I was raised, and it relates to my motives for office, and it actually relates to some of the things that were said. So I'll simply read this, if I may. And this is an excerpt from the prayer of St. Francis. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. Grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive. And for me, at least, that kind of sums up why and I think all of us are here, why you are here, why we're dealing with the issues we're dealing with. And I will hope to hold those principles true as we vote on these different items. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Mosevich.
Thank you. Yesterday at the State of the County, there was a lot of talk about the crisis we have here in our community in homelessness and housing. And this morning, some numbers came out that were kind of interesting. Between the years 1960 and the beginning of 2010, Oregon created 47 new homes for every 100 new residents we gained. Between 2010 and the end of last year, the average was 37 homes for every 100 new residents. And we wonder why we have a housing crisis. In fact, the crisis has gotten so bad that I've been getting emails about why would Lane County consider providing homes for refugees when we still have veterans on the street. And it's gotten so bad that people demonize the homeless enough that somebody shot a BB gun at them out of a car and felt justified in doing that. We have reached crisis proportions in this issue. It's one of the reasons why I pulled the letter from the consent calendar, because I'm getting those kinds of questions. How can we deal with outside families and housing them and providing them case management when we still have families needing housing and case management here in Lane County? And before people, start accusing me of everything from xenophobia and all that, I am the great-grandson of refugees. My name kind of says it all. They escaped the Balkans right before World War I, escaped extreme poverty in Eastern Europe, only to find extreme poverty working the coal mines in Utah, and eventually working out of there. I've hosted foreign exchange students over the years. Students from Turkey and Mexico and Germany, Poland, Finland, all over the world. So this isn't about xenophobia, and it isn't about anything anti-immigrant. My only questions about this is, are we diverting resources that could be used for housing homeless, and are we adding households taking up housing in this community versus that? And I want to understand that. I also want to understand how this is being funded, whether it's utilizing local resources that could also be used towards the housing crisis. That's all I want to understand, because those are the questions I'm being asked. While we still have homeless veterans here, while we still have families that are local families being displaced by high rents due to the fact that we're not building enough housing for our new residents, we're inviting folks from outside of our community in. I understand the need. Believe me, my family history understands that need. But that's why I asked to have this brought out as a separate discussion so we can understand it. I'm happy that there's some folks here from Catholic Community Services. I sent an email last night to staff so they would understand the questions I had about this. The other question about this is, if we do sign this letter of consent, does it open up other programs to do resettlement outside of Catholic Community Services? Is it a carte blanche? So those are the questions I want to get answered before we take a vote and have that discussion open, because I'm getting a lot of questions online since the news came out over the weekend that we were going to approve this letter of consent. And it usually had to deal with, why aren't we dealing with the local problems first? And is this deflecting resources from resolving our local problems? So I really appreciate the folks coming in to talk about that. I'm happy you're here, because I really just want to understand before I take a vote, so I can take a vote with knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? All right, I will just close with Mr. Lowry's request for a letter of support for the McKenzie CDC's application to Business Oregon. I support that. I'll bring that up a little bit later in the meeting to see if there's board support for that. So we'll move on to item 5. Is there any emergency business?
No.
Okay. So item 6 is the consent calendar. Is there a motion to approve the consent calendar with the exception of 6A5?
So moved.
Second.
All right, moved and seconded. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. Okay, passes unanimously.
I heard a nay in the audience.
I love the cooing. No need to move her out of the room. We love
Might have a
having
chair
her.
right here.
No, don't do that. Pat will be distracted.
So shall we move to item 6A5 from the consent calendar, which is an action item in the matter of approving a letter to the U.S. Department of State regarding consent to initial refugee resettlement in Lane County. Commissioner Bozovich spoke to this earlier. Is there additional discussion? We got a couple people coming forward. Perhaps you can give us your input, and then we can ask for further discussion from the board. Mr. Rickoff.
Chair Book, County Commissioners, I asked to join you this morning, and Greg Rickoff, Director of Operations. This was a request that came in specifically to me, and I was the individual that made the assignment. First, honestly, to Alex Kyler, because it is simply a change in federal legislation that requires this act to continue to do what our community has been doing for some time. Alex was unable to get to that, so then I assigned it to Jeff Kincaid, who was able to complete this work. Jeff is here ready to answer what questions you might have. You know, I do want to say that the issue of refugee resettlement, asylum seeking is as old as the American experience itself, that the conversation in terms of framing this, in terms of our ability to take care of our own, is as old as is older than the country we have formed. I would contend, and this would probably be a valuable conversation for us all to participate in terms of who are we then if we are struggling with those who have the least, we're requiring them to compete amongst themselves. With that said, your points are very well taken, and we have some specific answers. Commissioner Bozovich. Jeff, do you want to proceed?
For the benefit of everyone here, I can just do a very brief overview of why this item came to the board outside of Greg. So this was in response to Executive Order 13888, which essentially placed a requirement that communities that are going to have refugees resettled initially in their communities have to consent. So it added that requirement where previously there was none. So now it's sort of an opt-in, and if you don't opt in, then refugees will not be placed in your community. So because Catholic Community Services of Lane County operates a program, they reached out to staff to get this letter drafted. This is something that the governor has also commented on or written a letter, Clackamas County, and as you heard, the mayors of Eugene and Springfield as well. I'm prepared to answer most of the questions Commissioner Bozovich has. I don't know if you'd like to ask them in a specific order, but the use of funds, there are no federal funds that flow to Lane County as a result of this work, but also we're not at least directly paying any funds for this program. And then as far as numbers, I believe I'd sent you an email, Commissioner Bozovich, but lately the numbers have been a lot lower, as you heard this morning. In 2018, 589 total refugees were resettled in all of Oregon. And as you heard in the last 3 years, it's been really small for Lane County in particular. This is about 1.8% of total refugees allowed to resettle in the country. And then
This represents the work of a 45-year-old program, 50-year-old program?
quizzing me, I don't know.
When we have
Our
folks in the
local
audience.
our local program
yes.
is only 3 years old, actually, 4 years.
But we've had refugee resettlement.
Yes.
at least the last 50 years, specific to the counts.
Oh, yes, since 1975, I have counts back to then. Sorry, I wasn't picking up.
Any other questions? Commissioner Farr?
Not a question, but a bit of a statement. I'm an immigrant myself. I was not a refugee. My grandmother, however, was a refugee from Ireland to Scotland in the 1800s when there was no food in Ireland. Not a political refugee, but fleeing the country for a particular reason. They were welcomed in Scotland. When I came to the United States, we had sponsors. It was required at the time to have sponsors to bring us over. And when we came, we lived with a family. We had a place to stay when we lived. And I would hope and expect that our local families are really receptive to housing folks who are forced out of their own country to come to this country. I think that is generally the rule. And I see nodding from the folks from CCSLC that that's typically the case. So I don't believe, generally speaking, that people who are seeking political asylum from other countries, fleeing for their lives in many cases, I don't believe that they're necessarily affecting our housing stock here, because I believe they're assimilated into families predominantly locally. I could be corrected if that's not correct, but.
Chair Buck, Commissioner Farr, part of the requirements of the program is that they find housing for the refugees and ensure that after the 90-day period of case management, that they're going to be able to maintain that housing. So.
Excellent. That answers my questions. There was a question in there, even though it was predominantly a statement. Thank you.
Any other? Yeah? Oh, Commissioner Sorens?
Thank you. Well, Jeff, I know this executive order is fairly new, so could you go over the timing of this presidential executive order?
Yes. Chair Buck, Commissioner Sorensen, the executive order was signed on September 26 of 2019, and it directed the Secretary of State to come up with rules on how and guidance on how to implement. The guidance was pretty plainly that either the executive officer or the chair or president or what have you of elected bodies has to provide a letter.
So really, the only difference is that this executive order changes it from the governors of the 50 states have to say whether they'll take refugees to all local governments and state governments. So in the case of Oregon, with its 36 counties or its 216 cities, instead of one letter saying, yes, we have a group of people willing to accept refugees, it would be then the 216 cities, the 36 counties, and the state. Is that the bottom line for this change in the executive order?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Sorensen, yes, it essentially makes a very large opt-in program for communities around the country.
Okay, very good. And we heard from the advocates that there are likely not to be any refugees. How many refugees are we authorizing by this letter?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Sorensen, this letter doesn't authorize a specific amount of refugees. The federal government sets the allocation of refugees by region each year. I can tell you that in 2018, it was only 589, whereas in previous years, it was twice that or more. So it really depends on federal policy.
Yeah, but what is that?
Sorry, that was statewide, so the numbers in Lane
Statewide, 500.
In 89, yes.
In 1989.
No, 589 in 2018.
589 in 2018.
18.
Thank you. Okay, so, okay, good. Well, I think we should move ahead with this, and is it appropriate to make a motion to approve the order?
Yeah. Is there any other comments before we move forward?
I have a comment.
Commissioner Bernie?
Forgive me, I'm not trying to be critical, but I hear apples and oranges. I mean, could we have, like, for the last 5 years per year, the amount of families in Lane County that this relates to? Thank you so much.
Chair Buck, Commissioner Bernie, as Christine talked about in public comment, it's actually been relatively small. It's been, what was it, 9 individuals and 4 families since 2016. So.
Yeah, I think one thing that I want to so that we're not talking about apples and oranges, I'd just like to clarify the distinction between refugees admitted under the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program and asylum seekers. So, and no one should feel bad about not understanding the difference. I didn't know the difference before I started working in this program. So the folks at our southern border who are seeking entry into the country, they are seeking entry as asylum seekers. And so basically once they are here with their feet on U.S. soil, then they can make a claim for asylum, and that claim is adjudicated in the immigration courts. Refugees flee their home country to usually a neighboring country, though not always neighboring, and while they are there, they register with the United Nations. Their case is adjudicated through the UN and then referred to the United States Department of State for resettlement. So they are given their refugee status while they are overseas, outside of their home country, but overseas. And then they come to the U.S. with that status in place. So this is a very small, it's a very distinct group of individuals. So this is not, there are asylum seekers in our community. There are hundreds, possibly thousands, but there's no central system for serving them, and there's certainly no way to bar their entry. So in terms of what Catholic Community Services has our work in the last several years, our contract, we are a remote placement program. Remote because we are outside of Portland. And we always get a kick out of that. And our contract allows us to serve up to 35, resettle up to 35 individuals per year who have a U.S. tie here in our community. So in 2016, we resettled 5 individuals. So this is, let's see. In fiscal year 17, we no, I'm going to stick with calendar years, sorry. 2016, we resettled 5 individuals. 2017, we were assigned no one for resettlement. 2018, we were assigned 3 individuals for resettlement. In 2019, 1.
So, thank you. That really helps me. It sounds like the practical and pragmatic aspects of a program that's ongoing are not overwhelming at all, and this becomes a matter of are we a welcoming community, and that clarifies that for me. Thank you very much.
And if you could remind us your name.
Christine Zeller Powell.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other comments? Yep, Commissioner Bozievich.
Thank you. So I really appreciate the distinction between refugee and asylum seeker. To me, that's a very important distinction because these folks are, waiting their turn in line, so to speak, from outside the country rather than, violating our immigration laws first and then asking. There's somewhat of a difference for me. But I had 2 other quick questions. One is, does the consent letter limit it to just this program by Catholic Community Services?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Bozievich, it does not. The program, the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program, works with NGOs, non-governmental organizations such as Catholic Community Services of Lane County to place individuals in into communities to ensure that support system is in place so they're successful once they're placed. So currently, as they're the only program in Lane County, we're limited to what their placements are. But it does, if another NGO opens up and begins doing these services, there could be more.
Okay, I just want to make that clear. And you did state earlier it doesn't have any, the consent letter doesn't limit the numbers that could possibly come to Lane County. That's all federal government decision making. Ms. Powell, how does Catholic Community Services fund their case management and housing for these folks?
Okay, so we have a contract, we have a memorandum of understanding with the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops Migration and Refugee Services Program, which is one of the 9 NGOs that has a contract with the Department of State to do the refugee resettlement. So we're one of the local partners. And through that contract, when a refugee is assigned to us, we receive $900 for case management and the refugee receives $1,125 as a reception and placement grant. And so that's the funding that we receive. And we do private fundraising, that does not cover the costs of the case management or necessarily the cost of resettlement. And so we do private fundraising for the rest.
From locally here in the community?
Yes.
Okay. So it kind of answers a lot of the questions I've had about the program. Is there limitations and all that? Who exactly, and I appreciate the distinction between refugee and asylum seeker. And I appreciate that a good portion of the funding comes from the Catholic charitable organization that's national rather than local. It's still, as limited as it is, I don't think it has a large impact on our ability to serve the homeless here and house people. So I'm probably going to go ahead and vote in favor of the motion. But I did want to understand the program better, and I appreciate you guys coming in, taking the time, because it is such a small program.
Yeah. Well, and if I may, Catholic Community Services of Lane County serves the homeless population here. We have many
aware.
programs, yeah. And this is a question we've discussed, how would we fund this, and we've not found it that working with the resettling refugees has diminished our support for our other programs.
Excellent. And that's part of the major objection I was hearing from folks is while we still have local families seeking shelter, local families unhoused, how do we take in people from other countries? And I really appreciate that these are coming from a system that's, designating these folks as refugees. They're waiting their turn from outside the country, and then we're resettling them with folks that have ties here. And from my understanding is most of these people become employed and housed and taxpayers rather shortly, which is also a plus. As we have a 3.9% unemployment rate, there's a need for a workforce. So there's actually an economic benefit to having employable people reside in our county and bringing them in. There's also a benefit to bringing in outside cultures. It's one of the reasons why I housed exchange students, and the importance I felt of having those students attend our local high schools and mix with our local population so they could appreciate the cultures of Turkey and Mexico and Germany and Finland, Poland, and other places I've housed students from. So I appreciate the program. I appreciate you all taking the time to come in. I just felt it was really important that we pull this as a separate vote because it had received a fair amount of press play. I was getting a lot of questions about it. So with that, I'd like to move approval of consent item 6A5.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Bozievich, second by Commissioner Farr. Any discussion? Commissioner Bernie.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Yeah, I want to thank Commissioner Bozievich, and I want to thank you all for being here. To me, the more granular we get, and I know we're not getting granular, but nonetheless, the more we understand and appreciate publicly and then can vote, I think the better we also can assist the community understand some of the questions that were raised. I also received questions only because this was in the newspaper. So thank you all very much.
Yep, Commissioner Sorensen.
I just want to thank everybody involved in bringing this forward. I don't actually think it's needed in the sense that if this executive order hadn't been written, we wouldn't have to do this. But on the other hand, it gives us an opportunity in approving it to just be mindful of how important it is that we are a welcoming community, that we are well aware that most, not all Americans are immigrants. A lot of people in America aren't immigrants. They either were living here before we formed a government or they were brought here rather forcibly and cruelly. And so it's not necessarily a good way to describe the slave experience to talk about it as being an immigration experience. I think that it's good that all the commissioners in some way currently have some connection to the immigrant experience, and it is getting more distant for me as a third generation American to appreciate what the challenges are. I have memories of talking with my grandfather about what it was like to be stuck in the bottom of a boat coming across the Atlantic Ocean from Scandinavia. So I do have some family folklore about it. And but I think to get a real life, version of it now is to go to Central Latino and talk with people that are there. That will give you a real stark imagery of what the experience is for many people. So I'm glad we're approving this. I wish the president had not made this executive order. I wish we didn't have to do this, but I think on the positive side, it's going to enable thousands of cities, thousands of counties to be forthright in their support and be welcoming. So thank you very much for all the work you guys and women have done to bring this forward.
Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Passes unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll move on to item 7A, Order 20-01-07-19, in the matter of approving 3 contracts and 3 amendments and delegating authority to the county administrator to sign the approved contracts and amendments. And with us is Ms. Gaffney, Director of our Health and Human Services.
Morning, Chair Buck, Commissioners. As you know, we regularly move many revenue and expense contracts through our department, and when we have amendments or contracts that are new, we take the opportunity to lift those up for the board and provide you the opportunity to ask any questions you might have. Today, we have 3 amendments and 3 contracts, new contracts that are in the packet. 3 of those relate to our food handlers, shared service with other counties, and then on the amendments list, there's one in particular that I would lift up for you, just because I know we've talked a lot about our issues related to behavioral health in the community, and particularly that intersection between behavioral health and public safety. So we do have a revenue agreement amendment with the Oregon Health Authority on the list today, which includes additional revenue for those people who are found unable to aid and assist in their own defense, so are either sent to the state hospital for restoration or held here in the community for restoration. And these dollars are increased dollars from the state that continues. You may recall the last emergency board gave an additional allocation to the county to address that issue, and so this is a continuation of those funds to help support community restoration. So those are our 3 contracts and 3 amendments. I'm happy to answer questions about any of those or anything else this morning.
Any questions? Comments? Okay. I would entertain an order to approve order number 20-01-07-19 as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Verney, second by Commissioner Sorensen. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Okay, passes unanimously. Thank you. We'll move on to item 8A, County Council. We have Mr. Dingle. Any announcements?
No, Chair, there's no announcements from County Council.
Okay, we'll move on to item B, Order 20-01-07-20, in the matter of notifying board members of emergency meetings and board participation in emergency meetings. Mr. Dingle.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think the board members are very familiar with this. I think it was 3 years ago or 4 years ago, the board went through and adopted some specific procedures to deal with emergency situations. One of them was reaching agreement as to how individual board members would be notified in the event that there was an emergency and they couldn't get to a meeting. And the reason that these two come up each year is because the board specifically said that they wanted to revisit these or at least review them annually to see if anybody wanted to make any changes. No one has told me that no board members have approached me with any information that they're dissatisfied with the current notification procedures, so I don't really have anything to add unless the board has a specific question.
Commissioner Sorensen.
My main concern is how, in a practical sense, you interpret this board order to notify me and the other commissioners of when an emergency meeting is needed.
I'm not sure I understand.
How do I get notified?
You get notified by the various methods that are described in here. I think we agreed on, I think the first thing that Ms. Jones is going to do is going to attempt to contact people by telephone. We put in text because sometimes text might be up when something else isn't working. She has landline telephone numbers for you. We have emails. I mean, essentially, we're trying to exhaust things. The only thing I will say is when we get to the, depending upon what happens with I believe is Chair Buck, is it in April that we're going to see a demonstration of remote participation?
Oh, excuse me?
A different remote presentation, video presentation of the board?
I am not sure.
Okay, well, whenever that happens, we may want to make, that technology may require some changes to this order because of the different capabilities that we have right now. At the time this was done, really I think that we decided the only real way the board member could participate remotely would be by telephone and maybe by Skype.
Is there some kind of contemporaneous requirement? In other words, you notify, or, the county administrator or whoever's organizing this meeting notifies the commissioners? Do they do it sequentially, or do they do it all at the same time? In other words, one commissioner might get the announcement 2 minutes before the board meeting, and one commissioner might get it 10 hours. So how do you make it fair in notifying the commissioners?
Those issues were discussed, and I think what Ms. Jones does initially is to send it to everybody at the same time, because the preferred thing she does now is email. She can do the same thing with text. When it comes to doing more individualized things like telephone calls, obviously you can't make five different contemporaneous phone calls to 5 different people. So I think it's just driven by.
In one of my campaigns, I made 3,000 telephone calls in one contemporaneously. So it is possible.
Yeah, and I think the thought is that we do everything that was possible. So I think a lot of the things that we do are going to be simultaneous just because of the nature of the platform. Yeah. But obviously, if we go old school and we have to start calling landlines or calling individual cell phones, that's going to be an individual call.
Well, I do think it's important, and there have been times in the past when, let's say, county administration or someone, and this is way before Mr. Mokrzyjski's time, but played favorites in terms of who was going to be notified when a meeting was going to be planned, and that resulted in an absence of some commissioners who were never informed in a timely fashion of an emergency board meeting. So it's not just a fiction or a matter of that this might happen. This has already happened in the past. Now, it has not happened in recent years, and I don't think it will, and I think this board order is a good way to try to avoid that because we're laying out the procedures. And I will also say that I think it's always good practice for all of the commissioners to stay in touch with the board coordinator, and that way, whether you are going to be out of town on county business, out of town on personal matters, or just unavailable, that you figure out a way to keep our board coordinator informed, because that's really the practical part of it, and that worked well when we had our emergency a year ago. Thank you.
And Chair Buck, Commissioner Sorensen, we could certainly could add. I could certainly add another bullet point that would say something to the effect that board members should be notified as contemporaneous as possible, or as close as reasonably possible at the same time. I do think that I can check with Ms. Jones. I think what she does, just as a practical matter, is I think sometimes, depending on the circumstance, that she starts with the chair and the vice chair.
Yeah.
To basically to see what their availability is. So there may be a difference in terms of trying to figure out when folks are available. You'll recall we went through that whole issue with one of the, that's one of the things that the Oregon Supreme Court recognized, is that there is nothing wrong with contacting board members and finding out serially what their availability is for an emergency meeting, because otherwise calling a meeting when you don't know the people are going to be there would be pointless. So, the chair could say, we're going to do it tomorrow at 10 o'clock. The only problem is the chair is the only person who can make it. Yeah. And then you'd be sitting there with an empty meeting, and then you just throw out random dates until you got a quorum, and the court realized.
Maybe in terms of the future of this board order, we could have it that it's, the order will be chair, vice chair, senior to junior, and that way it's clear who goes first and who goes last.
In that scenario, I'm last.
That's got to feel good.
Any other questions? I would just clarify on the remoting in that we will be testing that in a week or two, but that's no guarantee it would be ready in April, and I would highly recommend that that is not a use for contacting us in an emergency such as what this is describing. So with that, I will entertain a motion to approve order number 20-01-07-20 as stated.
So moved.
Second.
All right, moved by Commissioner Burney, seconded by Commissioner Sorensen. Any discussion?
So the changes can be made down the road. We'll approve it as written today. Is that a fair summary?
Yes, and I've just made a note to myself. I was going to double check what Ms. Jones's practice is, and what I was going to suggest is that I take a stab at a draft of an additional bullet point that captures what you've brought, and I would just send that to the board for their review. And then if the agenda team decides, I could bring it back later with that change, or we could wait until next year. I'll leave that up to the agenda team.
Any further discussion? Commissioner Brozovich.
So, we brought forward these procedures in part because of the issues around calling emergency meetings and some of the questions on that. Also, just, it was well demonstrated during the snowstorm last year. We needed to get an emergency meeting together. Only one person could actually physically reach Harris Hall. The rest of us had to participate remotely, and that, in this order, we set up the fact that we could do that and how we were all notified. In that case, just as the case that was ultimately settled by the Oregon Supreme Court, the time and date of that meeting was first set up through the agenda team to make sure that the agenda team, was able to attend, and then there was some notification out to the other members to confirm that there would at least be a quorum present. That same thing was done previously. Commissioner Sorensen's statement that favorites were played was not true. And I just want to say that the Oregon Supreme Court, in fact, confirmed that it was the agenda team that was involved in setting the time and place of a meeting. Once it was set, all commissioners were notified with no favoritism.
Yeah, just to be clear, I'm not referring to anything in the past 20 years. I'm referring to things prior to that where the board did do that when there was no agenda team and when the board chair solely set the agenda. So I'm not referring to anything fairly recently. I'm referring to some things that happened a long time ago.
Thank you. I appreciate that distinction.
Any other discussion? All right. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. Passes unanimously. Thank you. We'll move on to item 8C, order number 20-01-07-21. In the matter of authorizing the county administrator to expend and commit county resources during an emergency until an emergency meeting of the board occurs. Mr. Dingle.
Thank you, Chair Buck. Members of the board, this is another order that was adopted really to bring what was happening in the real world sense, legitimizing it. We recognize that, for example, with the snowstorm and other situations, that very quickly Mr. Mokrahysky's authority, spending authority, could be exceeded, and it wasn't practical to get the board together to on an almost daily basis, depending on the expenses that are involved, approve it. So the board delegated him emergency authority, or the person in his position, emergency authority, to spend funds to deal with it with these different understandings. And again, just like that other order, the agreement was that this would come back not on the consent calendar, but in front of the board, so that the board would have an opportunity to have input and alter it if they didn't think it was working properly. From my perspective, it has worked just fine, and I don't see I'm not recommending any changes.
Any comments? All right. I would entertain a motion to approve order number 20-01-07-21 as presented.
So moved.
Second.
All right, moved by Commissioner Burney, second by Commissioner Sorensen. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. Passes unanimously. Thank you.
And I will circulate that other version for the board to review.
All right, we'll move on to 9A, announcements.
May I make a suggestion, Madam
Sure.
Chair, that the good folks from Homes for Good have been patiently waiting, as well as I think folks from OSU. So I'm happy to wait on that, and I think Mr. Kyler's 9B could wait if you want to take up 9C and then 9D, and then we can go back through those.
Very well. We'll move to item 9C, order -20-01-07-23. In the matter of appointing a new resident commissioner for the Homes for Good Housing Agency Board of Commissioners. We have with us Mr. Fox. And do you have a guest?
I do. Chair Buck, let me begin by congratulating you with complete respect for all members of the commission. It's powerful for me to have a woman at the helm of the board, and I greatly respect you and appreciate working with you. So, Chair Buck, members of the board, I'm before you today to recommend appointment of Shar Revis as one of 2 appointed commissioners for the Homes for Good board. Just a couple words about process. In August of this year, the Homes for Good board appointed a subcommittee, if you will, that included Commissioner Buck, or now Chair Buck, and 3 members of the Homes for Good team, including myself, Ella Kubak, our communications director, and a woman named Aisha McCoy, who's an instrumental member of the real estate development team and also a member of our diversity, equity, and inclusion team. We put the word out through our networks for the people we serve. We ended up receiving 3 applications. We reviewed those applications. Our intent was to interview all 3 applicants. That included Commissioner or Chair Shar Revis. And a week before we did the interviews, one applicant withdrew her application. We ended up interviewing Shar and a woman named Terry, and ultimately the committee recommended Shar to be our appointed commissioner. That recommendation was made to the Homes for Good board. The Homes for Good board accepted and approved that recommendation, and now we're before the Lane County Commissioners, which is the appointing body for the Homes for Good board, with the recommendation that Shar Revis be approved as Homes for Good's appointed commissioner. I do think it's worth noting that Shar's here. There's 3 generations of women from Shar's family. So Shar, obviously, Amalia, her daughter, and then her granddaughter, Serena. And I just really value Shar's leadership as the chair. She's in constant communication with me, My estimate is that as chair, she spent no less than 20 hours a month representing Homes for Good, supporting me, and also bringing things to my attention that need to be improved or worked on. So again, I'm just honored to wrap up my brief comments and my recommendation that you approve Char's appointment for the Homes for Good Board.
Thank you. Any comments, Commissioner Sorensen?
I move approval.
Second.
Right, we've got first by Commissioner Sorensen, second by Commissioner Bozievich. Any discussion? Commissioner Farr.
Ever so briefly, it's rarely that I get a chance to publicly say this, Char, but thank you so much from my heart for the work that you do, because it goes far beyond meetings, it goes far beyond the call of duty. You step up and advocate for the people who live in Homes for Good housing in ways that I've never seen before. It's been amazing, and I'm proud to work alongside of you.
Commissioner Sorensen.
I just want to mention, Char, that in my multiple decades now on this board, you're by far the best advocate for the residents. You're always there, you're always asking the good questions, and your leadership is really appreciated.
Any other comments? Commissioner Bozievich.
I just want to say I'm proud that Char is one of my constituents.
All right, with that, all those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed, nay. Passes unanimously. We'll see you at the next meeting, Commissioner. And thank you for bringing your whole family. I love seeing little ones here. All right, we'll move to item 9D, our report for the Oregon State University Extension Service renewal options and information. We have with us Mr. Kyler, our Intergovernmental Relations Manager. Kyler.
Good morning, Chair Buck and Commissioners. Just a reminder, a year ago, I think your first meeting, we were talking about a different revenue measure as well. So sort of ironic that here we are again, first meeting of the year with a revenue measure potentially in front of for your consideration. I've provided a packet for you. I think that the board is fairly well-versed on what has been occurring. The Extension Service of Oregon State University did come to the Board of County Commissioners about 5 years ago and started to discuss a partnership with the county whereby they sought the county to sponsor, for lack of a better term, a revenue measure that would provide the Extension Service with some funding. This, the OSU Extension Service is a statewide service that really does provide, as the name implies, the extension of Oregon State University's expertise in a statewide manner. Typically, or at least in the majority of counties, they've actually formed their own taxation district where they have established a permanent rate, and the taxpayers support their operations through that mechanism. In Lane County, it's been, as I indicated, a Lane County levy that we've gotten an intergovernmental agreement with the Extension Service to provide the resultant funding to the Extension Service through a 5-year levy. They have reported back to you about the successes of their operations from their previous levy and have indicated that they would like to go for a renewal of that tax levy. I shouldn't use the term renewal because renewal implies that they would go out at the same rate. It's actually would be a new rate that they're proposing, but they'd like to go out for that in essentially the 4th year of their levy instead of the 5th year. So technically, that's sort of the decision before the board today is if the board wants to grant their request to go out a year prior to the expiration of their existing levy or wait until the last year of their levy. In the previous presentation that the board the OSU Extension Service staff made to the board during your last meeting of 2019. There were five or six questions that were suggested by the board that you wanted to get answers to. I've included those in attachment A to your packet. Quickly, Madam Chair, I'll go through that. Do we abandon the item or do we move forward? And the answer is that's your decision. We'll do whatever you'd like. The recommendation on this particular issue is that you wait until the end of that term of the levy and go forward in 2021. But the decision is yours, and you can see the justification that I came to in terms of our staff recommendation was because of the presence of the question of a Justice Center funding. What are the next steps that need to happen if this moves forward? So there are state mandates in terms of the dates that ballot measures must be prepared by, and for May of 2020, that date is February 28th. So you have 5 meetings between now and February 28th. So there would be a fair amount of work that would have to get accomplished during those 5 meetings in order to meet that deadline of February 28th to get the proper forms down to the clerk's office that will then result in the ballot measure being placed onto the May election. The costs to the county. The costs of the county are somewhat dependent on the size of the election in May, and I will remind the board that during the previous effort that we initiated back in 2016, there was an agreement that the Extension Service would pay $8,500 to the county for the costs of running that election, and that was taken from the revenue that resulted from the tax levy passing, overwhelmingly, I might add. Pros and cons. Pretty simple. The extension staff see a benefit. They've talked about sort of the same rationale that the sheriff had for going out a year early, just to make sure that they are seamlessly continuing their programs. There's no angst amongst staff and administration about, is this thing going to pass or not? Do we have to, potentially lay people off or not? So it's this. This is sort of the same dynamic that the sheriff expressed when he went out and came to you and requested that the county go out for that funding a year early as well. It is not the norm. I think in my conversations with the clerk, it was the first time for the sheriff's levy, the jail levy, that she had seen an entity go out in Lane County prior to the end or the last year of their levy run. I just basically said there's a challenge there because we do have a state-imposed deadline for the funding availability for the Justice Center, and so that's a pretty big deal, and the board has been previously made well aware of the dynamics of that $100 million in state match approximately that we have for a limited amount of time. Who is doing what? So technically, the final thing is that county council fill out a form and send it down to the clerk's office. It has the adopted ballot measure language, which consists of a caption, a question, and a summary that you have approved via a board order. That's what triggers her to put that ballot measure language out to the public for possible challenge. After I think it's a 5-day challenge. If nobody has challenged the language, it goes right on to the ballot for the May election. We have talked about the challenge of getting all that material together, because not only would you have a board order that provides that language, there's also a board order to form a voters pamphlet explanatory writing statement committee, and typically the board has called for a public hearing prior to those things to sort of vet with the public, or at least give the public an opportunity to come in and make comment on proposed ballot measure language. So depending on how you think about it, there's either 2 or 3 items that would have to come in front of the board, within this next window of your 5 meetings that exist between now and February 28th. We have already done that in 2016, so all the sort of templates for that work exist, and it could be that the OSU Extension staff, either wholly or at least in assistance to county staff, develop that work moving forward. Who else is intending to propose ballot measures or request additional resources? We do know that Lane Community College is intending to place a $145 million bond question in front of all Lane County voters. I think there's a very small piece of the northwestern part of the county that's not in the LCC district, but otherwise it is a countywide measure that they are considering placing on the May ballot. We've already had conversations with the board about the possibility of placing a bond measure for the Justice Center on the November 2020 ballot. And then I added that the sheriff will, at least my sense is the sheriff will seek to place a renewal of the jail bed levy onto the ballot, likely in May of 2022. So those are at least the county-wide issues that we're aware of at this point in time.
Thank you.
So I think that will conclude my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
All right. Any questions or comments? Commissioner Farr.
Thank you. Just a quick comment. I would love to go forward with this right now to give you the peace of mind that you described a few weeks ago, that so you don't have to worry about it and you don't have to push it up against what ultimately would be your deadline. I'm confident when we bring it forward that people will recognize and understand and support, once again, the ask that we make. Timing, as we've heard, is off. I'm going to talk a little bit about how that works in people's minds from my perspective. Return on investment is not a new term and it's not an outdated term. It really is the essential part of the value equation that people need to look at when they decide whether they're going to spend money on, whether it be a cordless drill or whether it be a jail. If people understand that the return on the investment is a greater value than the expenditure that they make, then they will support it. That's what we've seen in the past with y'all, and that's what we'll see in the future with you. I wish we could go forward with it immediately. I think based upon Mr. Kyler's testimony just now and the preparation that he did, the timing's not good in terms of our workload and our attention. 1 year from now, it's going to be a little bit easier for it. So my personal apologies for not pushing it forward right now, but I believe we have conditions that exist that really preclude us from doing it right away, and I apologize personally. I can only speak for myself. Extension's not exempt from the value on return on the investment, and people do recognize it. We speak about the many things, and I'm not going to rehash all the things that you all do. Let's just talk about Food for Lane County alone. Let's just talk about how much you've done for Food for Lane County, and it's vast. How you make nutrition available to people who otherwise would not get as valuable a nutrition as we're able to provide. So that being said, I have nothing more to say other than I love working with you. I love the bag that you gave me at AOC conference. I carry this up in my office right now. So thanks very much for all the work you do, and thanks for the way, in particular, you affect the young people in our community, giving them the values that you are able to instill upon them. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you. President Johnson is famous for the saying, the time to make a friend is before you need one. And I think in this instance, when Extension comes to ask for a renewal of their levy, and they're supported so strongly by the people of our community, and they spent so many years getting ready for the last one. This is the type of friend that Lane County government needs. And in my view, the possible conflict with Lane Community College, which I'm a big advocate of as well, I think is minor, because the amount of money that's being sought in the two measures is so vast. I mean, LCC has done a substantial amount of polling. They know that their measure is very popular. It's not going to be affected by a small measure that this extension levy represents. So in my mind, it is a positive thing to respond to a bunch of really well-meaning staff and well-meaning professionals that are trying to do something that we'd all like to see a government and do, and that is to effectively plan for their future. And so the reason that Lane County's sheriff wanted to go for the levy before was because they knew that they would be facing the very real possibility because of the employment laws that they'd have to give notice to people that they would be perhaps laid off. And it would come down to whether or not a particular group of voters would vote affirmatively at the moment they needed them to vote, as opposed to planning for it. And so it's really my view that we want people to see the county as integrated, as working together, and if we have a very popular program like extension that we can tie into, and then we ought to be doing that. And I think that inures to the benefit of other county programs, such as if the board decides to ask the voters again for money for a courthouse. My feeling is that we should move ahead with this. We should direct staff to work with OSU, get the necessary documents together, and make a decision to move ahead on this matter for the May election. And we've had several briefings on this, and I get it that we're getting close to some sort of drop dead date, that if we don't, if we delay the discussion of this beyond today, we don't make a decision today, then it's uncertain as to, well, what are we doing? We can certainly do the work in a timely fashion, efficiently, if we get going on it now. So when it's appropriate, I'll make a motion to direct staff to work toward putting this on the ballot.
Any other discussion? Commissioner Bozovich?
Thank you. So I'm torn about this because I truly support extensions services and what they do in the community. But I'm also very concerned about voter fatigue and other issues, and also staff time, and what our priorities are for this board. We have a strategic plan, and in that strategic plan, there's several things that we're really striving to do. And part of it's dealing with the homeless issue. Part of it's also trying to continue the repairs of our criminal justice and mental health system here in Lane County. And one of the critical parts of that is having the infrastructure to do so. And our current infrastructure, as far as our courthouse goes, doesn't support things well, like our mental health court, our treatment court, and other issues. It's constraining some of those. So I'm trying to balance in my mind, what I'm hearing out in my district, which is there is a lot of fatigue about levies. Everybody's asking for a property tax levy for everything. And there's a certain amount of people that are just at their limits. So, and then the secondary thing I'm also hearing in the background is we've set up a strategic plan with strategic goals, and staff is pretty well at their limits. So do we throw, I really appreciate, because we did the same thing with the sheriff's levy. Of course, we're talking about over 100 employees that are hired by that levy. And in a very competitive law enforcement labor market, the need to renew early was really important. I'm very torn about this. And as I try and do the political math in my head, One, I'm not as confident about the LCC levy. I think they're in trouble because they went for the max rather than trying to hit somewhere between their 90 million and their 145 million. And I don't think that's going to play well. Two, I think a lot of the voter base has seen their tax bills since they passed the 4J bond measure and is getting sensitive. So I'm concerned that we continually put things in front of the voters that don't match up with our strategic plan priorities necessarily, and also at the same time pull staff away from other priorities that this board has identified. We're coming up into a short session, and the same people that are going to be working on putting this levy onto the ballot are going to be the same people we're going to be asking to pay attention to bill analysis and lobbying for the short session, where we've got priorities around community corrections funding and other issues that need to be resolved for the county. So I'm teetering on the edge of saying, let's wait and do it next May, after we've had our shot at the Justice Center and after we've, seen how the voters are going relative to that, and also after we've figured out what's happened with everything from cap and trade and the carbon bill at the state level to CCA funding. So I'm kind of leaning the other direction from Commissioner Sorensen right now. And not strongly. I have to say I'm torn because I do really appreciate everything Extension's done, the amount of youth they've involved, the services they provide, and how much community support they have.
Commissioner
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. I don't think there's any question about support from this Board of Commissioners for extension. I think the question is time frame. So I actually have questions that I apologize, they're remedial. When does the current levy expire?
It expires in 2021.
What month in 2021?
Excuse me?
Do you know the month?
June 30th of 2021.
Thank you. So,
Yeah,
good enough for me?
I think at the November 2020 tax bills will be the last time people will see the levy on their tax bill, but the revenues will come in over that fiscal year.
Gotcha. So through that fiscal year?
Yeah.
I think the last fiscal year is the one that begins July 1, 2020 and ends June 30th, 2021.
Gotcha.
So I think the answer to the question is June 30, 2021.
Yeah, it's just a matter of time. Thank you. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. It's just a matter of timing. What I'm trying to get at is I appreciate the desire to plan way, 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 way ahead. I'm also on this Board of Commissioners confronted with people that don't have the luxury to plan way, 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 way ahead. I also, frankly, and I shared this last time, was given 1% in a private meeting that the renewal would be increased to, and in our public meeting, given a higher percent, which suggests, right, there's some fluidity in planning going on. So I find myself in the same position as Commissioner Bozovich. I want to support it. I want to give you the opportunity to have a second attempt if it doesn't pass. I frankly think this is not this is a complete list of ballot measures we know about, but there will be other. I mean, we've already talked on this board today about seeking revenues for housing. We've talked about there may be revenues for such unusual things as creating incentives for the installation of solar or other kinds of clean energy retrofit. We don't know. So I'm really wavering on timing. I'm not wavering on support. And I will lean on I'm not making the political calculation that it's good or bad for the county. I want what's good for extension, and I want it done in such a way that the timing is such that it doesn't overburden staff given other things that we're dealing with. And I don't know where that lies.
Can I make one response to Commissioner Burney? Chairwoman Buck and Commissioner Burney, I do want to emphasize that in terms of the dollar amount that is requested, that is a decision that the board makes. I mean, the Extension Service has presented to you with their hopes and dreams, but again, I want to emphasize this is a Lane County levy. We provide them with the revenue through this intergovernmental agreement. So ultimately, the decision about how much to go out for does lie with the board. The recommendation that will come forward at whatever time is simply a recommendation to the board. It is your decision about the dollar amount, as is the language in the ballot measure title. All that stuff is really at the dais level here.
Thank you.
So at this time, I'll make a motion, and I'll move that the board direct staff to work with the Extension Service to provide for a plan to place the Extension Service levy at the amount requested by the Extension Service on the May 2020 ballot.
And that amounts to 0.28.
Yeah, whatever they are currently recommending is my.
0.028, sorry.
Yep.
Was there a second?
I seconded that, yeah.
Okay. Motion on the floor by Commissioner Sorensen to move forward, seconded by Commissioner Farr. Any discussion?
I should explain.
Sure.
I had mentioned earlier that I'm prepared for 2021. I'm willing to explore any option to get it moving as quickly as possible. I'm not positive this is going to go anywhere, but you know you have the support. I believe you know you have the support of this entire commission at some level. Thank you.
Commissioner Sorensen?
You know, I feel like it's a tremendous amount of work to get a measure anywhere close to being presented to the voters. We have people coming in here all the time saying you should give money to housing, you should give money to education, you should give money to general government, you should improve what you're doing, you should get a ballot measure to replace a courthouse that's crumbling, that's within eyesight of this building. We have people coming in all the time asking us to put ballot measures on. I talk about ballot measures for housing all the time. I'd like to see the board move in that direction. But we don't have anything close to what Extension has done in terms of planning. You're literally the only current applicants, in my mind, for any putting a ballot measure on in front of the Lane County voters. So it's not like we have plenty of ideas out there, but ideas, turning them into workable ballot measures is a totally different thing. And so in my view, you've done the work, you've demonstrated the public support. I think part of my motion is to make sure that Extension is involved in the preparation of all these documents and minimizes it, and I know you're going to do everything you can to do that. And so I think we need to reward good planning, we need to reward public support, and I think a really judicious amount of money that can be defended. And so I think we need to move ahead. And if we don't want to move ahead, I think you should know that too. I think it's a matter of fairness for you to know whether or not we're going to do that or not. This gentleman has a question. I don't know how you want to handle that.
Well, how does the board feel about a question from the Extension Service in the middle of this?
I'm good.
You're our only audience, really.
I didn't really have a question. Chair Buck, thank you for recognizing me. I just was wanting to make sure I made myself available to answer any questions additional that you may have, and to say that we really do appreciate the unanimous support. We've heard it from all 5 of you at different meetings, that your support for our service and that you value the services that we provide to the county. And I wanted to say thank you and just say that we are here to answer any questions that you may have. We didn't bring our whole retinue of volunteers that will help us with this election if you do approve us to go forward. But, you know, we wanted to be available for you.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Okay, I will just say that your program is vital to rural communities. When we had your presentation a couple of weeks ago, all those locations you serve, majority were in my district of East Lane, and by far the majority were in rural districts alone. And because of how vital I believe it is to those communities who really don't get the service outreach that they deserve, I'm very supportive of the motion and moving forward. I was also very on the edge regarding timing, as Commissioner Bozevich was. But as I listened to everybody's comments, I know the timing is somewhat challenging for our staff, but I know that they can do what we need to do, and you've prepared as much as you can in advance. And without those increased services that are so related to housing and so related to feeding those that are on the margins, that need to grow their own food and do it safely, I am in a position where I would be supportive of this motion. Any other discussion? Commissioner Bozevich.
I just want to restate that my vote on this motion does not reflect my support for the service.
All right. If there's no other discussion, we'll move forward. All those in favor of a motion on the floor to move forward with the Oregon State University Extension Service renewal as presented by the Extension Service, say aye.
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 All those opposed?
Nay.
Okay. Passes 4-1 with Commissioner Bozevich in nay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time this morning.
All right, we'll move forward to finish the items up here in Section 9 for County Administration. Mr. Mokraski. Oh, you want to go back?
9B.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
We can move forward to
Sounds
9B.
easier.
Order number 20-01-07-22, in the matter of recommending a Lane County Board of Commissioner to the Board of Directors for the Association of Counties for the position reserved for a member county with populations of 250,000 or more. Mr. Kyler.
Thank you, Chairwoman Buck and Commissioners. This, again, is an item that has also been before you during that, I believe, last meeting of December. The Association of Oregon Counties has a board of directors. They have bylaws. There is a seat reserved for counties that have a population of 250,000 or more on the board of directors. It's a 2-year seat, and it is appointed by the president of AOC. And typically, there is a recommendation made to the president by the county that has a 250,000 population or more. And so what the action requested today is that you pass the attached order that recommends to the president of AOC one of you to fill that seat at the board of directors at AOC. Again, that appointment is made at a AOC meeting. They actually have a meeting on the coming Monday, and this could be accomplished during that meeting. And while we have not done this before, it is the case that we think that there should be a recommendation coming from the board to the president. And moving forward, we'd like to get this not on your annual appointments, because it's not really an appointment, it's simply a recommendation, and it's a 2-year seat on the board. And typically, this is done at the association's annual meeting in November. So staff will endeavor to get this in the future, in 2 years, in front of you prior to the AOC annual conference, so that we can just be prepared for that regular course of order in the future. But at the moment, the issue before you is to make a recommendation to the board president at AOC to fill the seat reserved for counties with a 250K population or more.
Thank you. Commissioner Sorensen.
So there's more than one county in Oregon with more than 250,000 people. Does each county make a nomination for this one seat? Or is there a seat for each county whose population is over 250,000?
Chairwoman Buck and Commissioner Sorensen, it's the latter. Each county with 250,000 population or more.
The $64,000 question, the $250,000 question.
Makes the recommendation, and the board consists of those commissioners from each county with 250.
Each of the big counties?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Any other discussion? All right, so it's our understanding we need to recommend somebody
Right,
from.
and you have a blank in your board order, so I think
For
what we're
this
seeking
particular
here is a name.
position. I know at our last discussion, both Commissioner Farr and Commissioner Burney had mentioned that, well, I have to clarify, Commissioner Farr has been in this position. He expressed that he may still be interested. I also mentioned that Commissioner Burney hasn't had a chance to have a leadership role on EOC, and I'm not sure if he's interested, but if either of you want to speak to that, feel free. Commissioner Bozievich?
So I just want to clarify that the AOC board is made up of 47 members. And included in that are the district chairs, and their alternate to the board is the district vice chair. Commissioner Burney currently is an alternate to the board, as I was last year. And in fact, almost every board meeting, I was the representative for District 5 because the chair didn't make it up to Salem for most board meetings. I was there already for Legislative Committee as co-chair of the Public Safety Committee. So I just stayed on for the board meeting to make sure that they could meet quorum requirements, because there has to be a certain amount of the board there to meet quorum. And particularly, there has to be a certain amount of representatives of districts represented. And so it's important to make sure somebody from the district's there. So Commissioner Burney is already an alternate on the board. So if he is the designee as the 250,000 and the board chair, the district chair is absent, he doesn't, it would be, he wouldn't have the ability to fill in as the alternate there. You're just one seat and one vote. So I think it would be wise if we were to appoint somebody that is not already an alternate board member. In that reason, you are designated as the at-large person for the district to Legislative Committee, so you'll probably be there in meetings too. Commissioner Farr is a co-chair of a committee, so he's always up there for Legislative Committee. I'm a co-chair. I'm always up there for Legislative Committee. So one of the three of us is usually there anyway. And the board meetings occur immediately after Legislative Committee. So, if you want to come once a month to Salem to possibly be the alternate board member or be appointed as the at-large, but then if Zan doesn't show up, we're short a voting member, hopefully you're coordinating with Zan so you know when she's going to show up or not, just as I did with Will Tucker. But that's kind of, it would probably be best, at least it would serve the county best, I think, to have one of the three of us that is probably going to be there anyway as that designated appointee for the 250,000.
Commissioner Burney?
I appreciate Commissioner Bozievich is looking out for me. I also, Commissioner Farr, I don't know if you know, did you receive the note I sent you? You might not have. It was late last night, and I apologize for that. But here's what it said. First of all, you'll be glad to know I have actually coordinated with Zan, and she's in Corvallis, and her intent is to be at all of the AOC board meetings in that capacity. I also gave it some thought because my desire is not to drive to Salem once a month, but my desire is to, after talking extensively with my wife, to Zan, and to one of the staffers at AOC, I would like to experience participation on that board representing this board, or at least the recommendation, if that be the will of the board. I also, and I apologize to Commissioner Farr for sending that so late, indicated that if he was still interested, I just wanted to let him know I was too, and I was perfectly happy with either of us, whomever the board did choose. But I do want to indicate that I do have an interest in the representation. But that's all.
Any other discussion? Commissioner Farr.
Madam Chair, I recommend, I move that we insert Commissioner Joe Berney in the blank and move for passage of order. Somebody help me with the order number.
So we have order number 20-01-07-22 as presented.
Second.
Okay. Discussion, Commissioner Bozievich.
With my apologies to Commissioner Berney, I'm going to have to vote no on this, and let me explain why. This goes back to the district meeting that was not completely attended, where Benton County orchestrated a complete upheaval of our past system of rotating chairs and vice chairs around the district between the three counties. The tradition and the long-running way we did that was to rotate around the three counties the chair and vice chairmanship, so that each county took a turn at chair and vice chair in order. And as the terms turned, the county that wasn't represented came in as the vice chair, and the current vice chair moved up to chair. And then whatever county had been chair was unrepresented in that way as far as the district chair, vice chair goes. They basically orchestrated a complete takeover of that, moving me off the board of commissioners, of the board of AOC. And in addition to that, they also kept a longtime legislative committee member off the legislative committee. And in doing so, they're erasing some history. I am the only board member here that has been going to AOC meetings consistently for the last 8 years and understands the trouble we got into at AOC with not paying attention to executive directors, and also understands the need to keep working on the finances of AOC relative to dues structure, dues increases, the work AOC does in Salem. I feel like having our alternate and then also our representative being a sophomore from the county with none of that history, none of the understanding of the finances of AOC on the board, to be short-sighted. And for that reason, that's why I'm going to vote against this. I've really, Commissioner Berney and I have a great relationship in some ways, but I am really disenchanted with how District 5 has been handling AOC, and this sort of coup that's gone on in the last 6 months is really disappointing. And if it continues, I believe we are going to see counties leave AOC. Douglas County is currently threatening, and there are other counties we just barely got back in the fold that are watching this happen, like Jackson County. And I think we're much stronger in unity, and I don't want to see this choice of representation that seems to be somehow or another politically motivated rather than with providing fair representation between counties.
Yes, Commissioner Berney.
First of all, I want to ensure that Commissioner Bozievich knows absolutely no offense taken and understood. What he is referring to, I was completely oblivious to in terms of anything other than right at that legislative committee. And I would share his concerns, and I actually do, as it relates to protocol and process. I would like to remove my interest in this from the process just described at the Legislative Committee.
District 5.
Thank you, sir. District 5. He knows I'll lean on him for history, if in fact I do that, and yet I don't want my candidate, my desire to be nominated by this board to see if there would be that accepted at AOC to be the cause of any controversy. I simply thought this would be a great exercise as I try and assume more and more responsibility as a county commissioner and with AOC. So I understand.
Any other discussion?
So is that a suggestion that I withdraw my motion? From you, Commissioner?
From me?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
From Jay, I would say yes.
If there's no other discussion, I'll just say my 2 cents. You know, I was at the District 5 meeting, and I was unaware of any particular coup. Everybody voted who was present, and hopefully everybody who participates in AOC has leadership that wants to attend those meetings. So when votes do come to fruition, that everybody is represented. I'm sure that Commissioner Berney will do an excellent job. He's a leader and smart, and we know he can make good decisions, and I would welcome the opportunity as another fellow sophomore commissioner that the opportunities like this open themselves to us. So with that, I will,
If
oh,
I
yes,
may,
more
I'll just,
discussion. Commissioner Farr.
my position on it, I have been far less a regular attendee at AOC than Commissioner Bozovich. And the reason is that it usually conflicts with other requirements. Other committees that require me to be here in Lane County in the afternoon. So while I'm co-chair of Veterans Affairs, and I'm also on the Health and Human Services Committee and also on the Legislative Committee now, it's really difficult for me to spend an entire day at AOC. Consequently, I don't know that I'm the best person in terms of being able to attend regularly, as you may be, Commissioner Berney.
Commissioner Swartz.
You know, I knew Mike MacArthur, I believe, in his role as a county commissioner before he became a county judge. And he, in my view, was a really good leader for AOC. And I'm not as familiar with all of the inner workings of AOC, but when he left, I think that was a big hole in the leadership of AOC. And I just, even as recently as today, inquired about the executive director search that's going on, and AOC is still in the process of finalizing the executive director search. And what I found good about Mike and AOC under Mike's leadership was that he recognized that it is a big can of worms to have a statewide organization in a state like Oregon, because, there's a big divide in the state in terms of how the counties are organized and the types of voters they represent, and we'd like to put as much of a positive imagery on it that we're all about Oregon counties and we're all about serving the public as Oregon County Commissioners. But the reality is there are lots of different types of representatives and senators that we have to deal with on state issues, and I think Mike, being a rural and Eastern Oregon guy and wheat rancher and county judge, really had a sense of his own committee. But of course, that leadership isn't just a sense of your own community, it's a sense of everyone else's community. And I think that they put this position in part because of a feeling that the larger counties were going to basically go it alone and wouldn't rely on AOC and wouldn't give money to AOC. And so they put some additional representation. And I'm glad they did. And I think that, one other thing about this whole rookie thing, I've used this term too in a pejorative sense whenever someone comes on the board. It was used against me as well many years ago. And I really don't really agree with that, because once you take this oath of office to be a commissioner, you're basically responsible as if you had done everything else in the past, and whatever you do from that moment on, you're a commissioner. So it's like you're either a commissioner or you're not a commissioner. And one thing I'm looking forward to is when my term is up and I'm no longer a commissioner, wow, that's going to be a big change for me, because every day I've woken up for 23 years that, there could be a text from Diana Jones or her predecessors that something needs to be done. And that's going to be a big relief. And I think that this 24/7 responsibility we have is a big thing. And I think we ought to be careful about. And also, I think it's a baptism of fire. Once you've been here a couple of months, then it just, the fire hose just never ends. It's just constantly pouring in. And I think, Joe, if you want to do AOC, I've been the least involved with AOC of the commissioners over the years. But if you want to do this, more power to you. And I hope that AOC is able to pull it together for the discordant views in the state, the big counties, the small counties, the conservative counties, the not so conservative counties, whatever. And I hope the new executive director will do that. And one of the things I'm planning on doing, which is why I've been emailing them, did they select a new person or not, is I'm planning on visiting with that person on this very topic as soon as they get appointed.
Any further discussion?
I'll just say that she was recommended for appointment, and they're working out her contract right now.
Okay. Well, we have a motion on the floor to have Joe Burney as the recommended member for populations of 250 or more for Order 20-01-07-22. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay.
Nay.
Okay. Motion passes 4-1 with Bozovich and nay. Thank you. Mr. Mokryski.
Okay, Madam Chair, Commissioners, I want to start just by recognizing Commissioner Sorensen and Commissioner Buck's service and leadership to the board in 2019. And congratulations to Commissioner Buck and Commissioner Burney for your roles in 2020. On behalf of our staff and the organization, we look forward to working with you on doing great things for our organization and community in the next year. And I want to just note and thank Commissioner Sorensen for his work in preparation for and in delivery of the State of the County address yesterday, which I, for one, have received a lot of positive feedback about and compliments of people feeling really good about the work that was accomplished by the board and the county last year. And I want to also call out 4 individuals who are really critical in making yesterday be such a success, who do so much of the work behind the scenes. But I think it's important that we recognize folks that are contributing to that work. Devin Ashbridge, who you all know, our Public Information Officer, did so much of the work for developing content, both the production of the video, content of the video, the message yesterday, and coordination of some of the logistics. Diana Jones, our board coordinator, who does really all of her work behind the scenes, but is critical to the day-to-day operations of our organization, was really impactful in a lot of the behind-the-scene logistics that were done. Laura Holtgrave, our executive assistant in county administration, as well, assisted with a lot of those logistics for yesterday. And then Neil Moyer from Metro TV, the video that was done that really was just outstanding. We do those every year, but this year's, I think, was particularly well done. So I want to thank Devin, Diana, Laura, and Neil for their great work in their behind-the-scenes efforts in making our State of the County for 2020 so successful. I want to also provide an update for the board on the City of Eugene's process. City of Eugene and county staff have been partnering together for almost 2 years on urban reserve planning. This is to identify areas surrounding Eugene, the Eugene urban growth boundary, that could meet the needs for our growing population. So if there's a need to expand Eugene's urban growth boundary, the urban reserves will be the first areas that would be considered in the expansion, any potential future expansion of the urban growth boundary. Eugene is holding 3 meetings over the next 3 weeks that we wanted to let the commissioners be aware of to update the study area, residents on the progress of that work. So those meetings, those public meetings will be held January 9th at Meadowview School, January 14th at Kennedy Middle School, and January 22nd at the Irvine Grange. All of those meetings are from 6 to 8 p.m. They're open to the public, and we want public feedback in those processes. There were postcards that were sent to over 800 property owners in the study area, all outside of Eugene's UGB. The Board of Commissioners will hear an update from staff on January 28th, and the Eugene City Council will have an update on January 29th. And then our staff plans to come back, along with city staff, for decision makers in the spring of 2020 for formal direction on urban reserves. So again, January 9th, Meadowview School, January 14th, Kennedy Middle School, January 22nd at the Irving Grange, all from 6 to 8 p.m. Any questions that you receive from constituents can be, or that you may have, can be forwarded to Lindsay Eichner in Lane County Land Management Division. There is a project page at www.eugene-or.gov/urban reserves, and that contains complete project information. And Diana Jones will send you all an email of this information, so you'll get what I just said via an email, but wanted to share that with commissioners so that you're aware of that process. And then finally, just a couple of housekeeping items. Tomorrow, Wednesday, January 8th, we have in the morning, of course, we have our budget leadership team meeting, which Commissioner Sorensen mentioned at the beginning, I think the beginning of this meeting. That will start at 8:15 tomorrow morning here in Harris Hall. The public is welcome. Employees that are able to attend are welcome to discuss the kickoff of next fiscal year's budget. We will have Mr. Rooney, the state economist, as well as other presenters there. That is intended to conclude around 11 a.m. And then tomorrow evening, we have both the Eugene State of the City is at the Holt Center, I believe begins at 5:30 tomorrow evening, as well as the Lane County Equity and Access Advisory Board that meets the first Wednesday of each month, meets tomorrow at the Charlton Building, second floor at 5:30 p.m. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you. If that's everything, we'll move on to item 10, Commissioner's Business. Item A is announcements. Any announcements? Yes, Commissioner.
I just wanted to kind of thank a lot of the people who've been thanked, but, I think about, Devin Ashbridge, certainly Chris Dobson, who brought the choir in, Diana Jones has been mentioned several times, Neil Moyer, and colleagues up there in the LCOG and helping to do the video, the people that helped write the speech and improve it. Just want to thank all of them. I also want to apologize that even though the speech that was released to the press mentioned Commissioner Berney, the project labor agreements and community benefits. That's in the release statement to the press, and the news media received that. But I'm afraid that it was my fault for turning the pages too quickly, and I actually did not read that part. So I just want to apologize. It was in the speech. It was in release speech, but it wasn't given. So I just want to apologize for that. But overall, I thought it was great. Also, the University of Oregon Army ROTC for their role in the flag preparation and their role in overseeing the lack of military etiquette in withdrawing the colors. They had to go to class, and so I don't know if anybody noticed that, but several of our more militarily aligned people did notice that little omission, I think. But otherwise, I think it really went well, and I just appreciate the commissioners and coming, and I'm glad that worked out well, and I hope we can do a good job next year.
Thank you. Any other announcements? Commissioner Bernie?
Commissioner Sorensen, I'm glad it wasn't personal. And I really want to reiterate again, Commissioner Bozovich, I understand your point about our earlier discussion. I really do. I would just like to announce, and if you know this already, I apologize, but I was informed a couple of weeks ago, but we just went into our recess, by Springfield Mayor Lundquist that a large tract of land that's been for sale in Springfield for quite some time has been closed. It was purchased by one of the country's larger home builders, D.R. Horton, and on that property now is planned, among other things, 174 single-family working-class homes, which when you add that to some of the Homes for Good investments, I think we're going to even see more momentum as we try and become friendly with and partner with the private sector where a lot of this building is going to take place from. So I just wanted to share that. It's kind of good news in Springfield.
Any other announcements? Okay, we'll move on to agenda team requests or work session requests. Commissioner Sorensen.
I want to note that I'm in favor of having staff prepare the letter on behalf of the Mackenzie River matter. I know that's on your list, but I want to make that, formal. And I have another one, but I'd like to see if there's enough head nods to refer that to staff.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
He referred to a grant request from Business Oregon. He never said what the grant request was for. So before I give head nods to a letter of support, I'd kind of like to know what the grant request was for. Can you briefly describe that?
So, if I may, I got an email, but I'm reading it this morning as we're in our meeting regarding this. So this is a letter of support for the Mackenzie CDC for their application to Business Oregon. It's my understanding that it's about $80,000, the grant reward for services that the CDC supports up the Mackenzie. I think Austin Ramirez might know a little bit more about that, but since he's not here, I'll try to briefly go through this. So it's for the 2020 grant cycles, and they're due January 19th of this month. I'm sorry to take a little moment here, but I'm trying to briefly go through here. I think part of it is going to be for probably the games that are coming up and preparing the Mackenzie for that. But basically, they're activities to improve local economy and foster enterprise and entrepreneurs to invest in our small unincorporated burgs along the Mackenzie. The grantors are not necessarily encouraging letters of recommendation, but they will allow one letter of organizational support to be included in the submission. And so that's the nuts and bolts that I have at the moment. I'm not sure if that's enough.
So I'm willing to give my support for having it come back to the board, but I will say I'd like to have some questions answered about, is anyone else in Lane County applying for a Business Oregon grant? And if so, who else is, and are we favoring one organization over another type thing? Because I do know that I think the city of Anita's used Business Oregon grants before to fund one of their ED positions there, one of their internships. So I just want to make sure that we're not, I don't think we submitted a letter of support for their past grants. So I want to make sure we're being even-handed in this, that there isn't a competing organization in Lane County. That's all.
That's fair, and this would come back on generally consent, but we could pull it for answers to those questions.
Or if they're answered in the report, in the staff report.
Yeah.
Just to make sure that we're not accidentally playing a favorite of one community over another within the county unknowingly.
Commissioner Brady?
You stole my thunder. So I'm going to suggest, yes, this will come to us next week as consent item, but in addition to what I would like from, I guess, Austin, but I don't know whom, what I would like is to know, one, if there are any other applications from the county, just as Commissioner Bozovich mentioned, and then two, if there are, have there been any other requests from the commissioners to write a letter of support? And if the answer is there's 3, but only 1 request, it's going to be easier for me to vote to approve this on the consent calendar than if there's 3, but 2 didn't know they could get a letter from the commissioners, et cetera, et cetera. I just want to avoid being, I share Commissioner Bozovich's concern on that one. But I look forward to supporting the McKenzie CDC.
Okay, I think we have enough head nods to support that with some explanation. And Commissioner Sorensen.
When you're done with this item, I do have another item.
Okay. Are we clear on that one, Mr. McCarthy?
And
Okay.
does that need to come back next week? Are they under a time
I
constraint?
think they are under a time. Yeah, they need it by the 19th. I think Austin is already on it.
Okay.
Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you. In our public comment today, once again, we had another public commenter talking about homelessness, and Commissioner Farr and I both talked a little bit about what are some of the revenue options to help with homelessness, and Commissioner Farr made a good review of the utility tax proposal that the city of Eugene made to the voters 24 years ago, and that there are other ways, other taxes out there to support government efforts to deal with the homelessness problem. I'm wondering, I guess maybe I'll phrase it as, I'd like to have a board discussion of whether or not we could coalesce around some interest in finding out more about the revenue options, and broadly stated, including utility tax, property tax, and others, to deal with homelessness. And that is not a direction to staff to have a briefing on it. It's more of a discussion of what kinds of revenue options would we like to request that staff pursue in dealing with homelessness. So that's my proposal. It's not to have staff do work, it's to have us have a discussion of whether we want to do any more and get more information from staff about options that either other governments are using or that would be available to Lane County government to deal with Lane County homelessness issues. That's my proposal.
Welcome to discussion.
Okay. I think that's at least 3. Okay. Any other agenda team work session requests? Not from anybody else. I do have one. In the past, the board, wrote a letter of recommendation for the offered, and I'm going to butcher this name, of course, Offered Scenic Bikeway. Thank you. I knew I was going to do that. So we have a specific request that came up, and so I'm going to restate it here for us, which is to request that the Public Works staff prepare a board packet, including a letter of support to be signed by the board chair urging the Oregon State Scenic Bikeway Committee of the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department to designate After Heidi Drive as a scenic bikeway. It would provide a connection with the Mackenzie Pass Scenic Bikeway and the communities of Sisters, Rainbow, and Oak Ridge, and they would all benefit from that particular linkage. It would also increase tourism and recreation in the area and have a positive economic impact on rural businesses in that area. If there's enough head nods, it would just come back as a letter of support and consent.
I support that. And it's already being used as a scenic bikeway even without the designation, but yeah, it should have that designation. Should have been years ago.
Okay. I think it's just an update of that previous letter, anyway. Oh, yes.
I'm in favor of this too, and I think that the road itself is a really beautiful connector, and for those who like to vacation in Lane County, I think if you're on either end of that road for your vacation, it's a really nice drive, and a lot of people aren't aware of it. It's pretty well marked. I have had some problems on that road in the winter, so you do want to bring snowshoes if you're in the winter. But it's a really nice drive, and I think that it definitely warrants, more identification as a scenic bikeway and scenic drive.
Okay. So, no other work sessions, agenda session request, okay? The next item is number 11. Are there any executive sessions for today? I'm not aware of any. No? Although I didn't, there's a section for other business, but what I didn't see on here is for you to be able to recap any assignments, or I may have skipped it.
No, it's not on here, but I can do that, certainly.
Any other business, item 12, before we recap? Nope. Okay, if you would like to review assignments.
Madam Chair, I had 4 items. The first is the OSU levy. I think we'll add that to our the action by the board to add the, to pursue the OSU levy ballot measure in May of 2020. So we'll add that to our work plan because that'll require a significant amount of work over the next month. The request for the grant support letter for the 2021 CDC grant for the Mackenzie River. And then the third one, I'd like just a little bit of clarification. What I heard was a board discussion, a work session or board discussion on homeless issues, just for the board to discuss additional strategies regarding homelessness. And I heard that there wasn't anything, there wasn't a desire to have staff produce anything or staff available, so it's just a.
Is it overview on homelessness or?
Well, my focus isn't on getting more information from staff. It's to have the board talk about what information, if any, they want from staff, and do they want to move ahead with any kind of revenue, learning more about revenue. So, yeah, staff participation would be great, but I'm really putting the focus on, does the board want to talk about local revenue?
Local revenue.
Yeah.
So it's additional local revenue for homeless services.
Yeah, or housing. I mean, it could be broader, but that's part of the discussion.
And Mr. Chair, if I may, I had nodded for that, and that's what I understood, is that it would be more a board discussion and less staff involvement directly or preparation on the part of staff.
Right. And I just want to make, there's a lot of work that's going in partnership between city and county staff and partner agencies into, because it's part of the board's strategic plan, that you have the benefit of that information as you're contemplating other discussions that could provide funding for that work. That seems pretty straightforward. And then I'm sorry, on the After Heidi, I just wasn't sure what the action was there. It was designation of that road.
Yes, it's an updated letter of support for their application for that to be a designated scenic bikeway.
Got it. Okay. So those are the 4 items that I had.
Anything else? No, Commissioner Boswich.
I have a piece of other business.
We can move back to that.
I've been discussing with Mr. Kyler an issue whether, and this is whether I attend NACO's legislative conference or not, based on whether we want to try and carry a resolution relative to amending the federal tort claims law as far as it covers FQHCs to make sure it covers third-party claims. And this is relative to, recent legal action here in Lane County and possible federal court decisions around that. We haven't quite gotten to whether we're actually going to put something through. We're having a discussion with folks from NACO either Thursday or Friday by telephone about whether it should be a resolution or whether it should be handled through legal action or not. There's still, but I think you guys understand the significance of this. And I just was wondering if with the board's support, if we do decide that a resolution's best, the opportunity to get AOC to support that's coming up Monday, and we don't meet between now and Monday. And if the board can maybe provide some kind of at least head nods or something around me continuing that effort with Mr. Kyler to look at that possibility of asking AOC to endorse a resolution to NACO around that particular issue of third-party claims against our FQHCs and whether or not we're going to be held harmless and represented by the federal government instead of having to represent ourselves.
Does this involve the minimizing or lowering the victim's right to obtain compensation, or does it have to do with the federal government's duty to represent us and does not affect the compensation that the victims, these third-party victims have, but it says if we receive the federal funds and we do what we're supposed to do, then they have to defend us, and the law is made clear that they have to defend us.
That's exactly what we're after.
And
it's who actually is the named party in the suit.
Yeah, and I guess one of the things that we have to be concerned about, and I'm sure Mr. Kyler and Mr. Dingell are all over this, but if we take the position that the law currently doesn't require that, and therefore we need a change, then it worsens our current claim.
And it's not so much, there's a belief that it doesn't require that. We want to clarify it, that it does.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
I firmly believe it does.
Yeah.
And that was the intent of that particular piece of legislation, to allow us not to have to carry malpractice insurance for all our doctors, nurses, pharmacists, physicians, assistants, et cetera, in our federally qualified health clinics, because the federal government was going to cover us for any tort claims against those parties.
Yep.
Just because the tort claim doesn't come from a patient shouldn't change that. But we have currently a district judge, which doesn't set precedent, that has actually seen that it doesn't cover third-party claims.
Yep.
And we'd like to clarify, yes, it does.
Yep.
It's not so much that we believe the law doesn't, it's we want to just make sure it's very clear that it does.
Well, I agree with what you're doing.
Commissioner Brady.
This is such a significant issue. I assumed, which I should not do, that we were already working as hard as we could towards resolution of this. And if what you, Commissioner Bozovich, will add to that, it only makes eminent sense as far as I'm concerned.
There's full support for that?
Thank you. I appreciate that. That just allows me, if we do decide to go towards a resolution, we can bring it to whatever committee at AOC, which will probably be Health and Human Services on Monday, and ask them to endorse that moving forward to NACO's HHS. So I appreciate that.
Very good. We're near the end. I just wanted to take a brief moment on something that I noticed. I very much appreciate your support for being chair. I have noticed during the meeting that there were several different ways that you address a woman in the chair position. And I would just like to state my preference that it be gender neutral. Chair alone is perfectly fine. That way people aren't feeling like they need to stumble around and do any other addition to the chair position itself. So for all those who are listening, staff, board, I would appreciate that. So thank you very much. And we will be back tomorrow. Our session regarding the budget kickoff will start at 8:15. I heard that there is coffee, maybe something a little yummy at around 8, if people want to come just a few minutes early. With that, I'll see you all tomorrow morning here in Harris Hall at 8:15, and we will adjourn. Is that loud enough?